Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Energy Utilities and Technology. My name is Melanie Sachs. I'm proud to be the House Chair of EUT as well as represent the wonderful community of Freeport. We will begin our afternoon with introductions. I will begin to my right with Representative Wadsworth.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathan Wadsworth. I represent House District 82, Southern Oxford County.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hilton Webb, and I represent House District 98.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reagan Paul. I represent House District 37 in Waldo County.
Good afternoon, Matt Harrington. I represent Senate District 33 in York County.
I am Chris Kessler. I represent District 121, which is part of South Portland and a smidgen of Cape Elizabeth in Cumberland County.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Foster. I represent District 32, which includes the towns of Dexter, Garland, Charleston, Stetson, Exeter, and a part of Bradford.
Good afternoon, everybody. Matthew McIntyre, House District 18, representing 16 towns, and at last count, 32 unorganized territories across portions of Penobscot, Hancock, and Washington counties.
Good afternoon. My name is Jerry Runte, and I represent parts of the towns of York and Wells, as well as the town of Ocoquan.
And as always, we are ably assisted by our wonderful team, our analyst, Lindsay Laxon, and our wonderful clerk, Lynn Lacroix. Okay, team. So this afternoon, we will be going through our items in the supplemental budget and having votes on those items, moving what we feel for recommendations to the Appropriations and Financial Affairs Committee. And then we will also have a report presentation by the PUC on the non-wires alternative assessment report. Those two items, we will do as much work as we can on the budget. I'll look to the PUC to tell me if they have time constraints. We may pause for a moment and then go into the non-wires alternative report and then come back to the budget if those deliberations are continuing on. I will note, committee, hopefully we are working through our work well together. I have refilled the candy bowl. We've got this. All right, team, go. All right. So with that, we will open up our work session on supplemental budget LD 2212. Lindsay, you, I think that you wanted to go through a few items to set the table around the budget.
Yes, thank you so much. So everyone should have their folders in front of them, hopefully, unless you took them home, in which case I cannot be accountable for what happened to those folders. Your folders from the joint public hearing with AFA, which should have a green packet in it, which provides information on the initiatives. You also have a packet in front of you with a heading at the top that this is for the supplemental budget. This is just a one-pager on the role of the policy committee in budget matters, which I'll touch on in a moment. But this white packet is the primary document we're going to be working from today, as this includes the report back template provided by the AFA committee. So unfortunately, you've got two different packets with some information, but today we're going to focus on this one. And so this will be the format we use to report back the committee's votes on the various initiatives within the committee's jurisdiction. I know you all have been through this before, but just as a reminder, so this work session will allow the committee to ask questions. The department is here. We also have a representative of FAME here as well to hopefully address any questions you may have, as well as our fiscal analyst. And so we'll walk through the initiatives that are in the report back document and sort of see how the committee would like to proceed at that point. But you may recall, usually the motion is to move something into the budget, and then there'd be a second and then a committee vote. This is not a formal vote like you would have on a LD report. This is more of a straw vote, so we can just do show of hands. I will be recording your votes, and then at the conclusion of this meeting, very swiftly turning this into a memo to report back to AFA, as the deadline is 5 p.m. today. AFA is going to be working this portion of the budget tomorrow. So the deadline matters. So we'll get this together as quickly as we can. I may not have the opportunity to bring back anything for your review, but we'll see where the committee comes out on this. So with that, if you want to turn to the first page, you will see the report back document, and just to sort of orient you to what's in front. So we start out with the Department of Energy Resources. You'll notice I've circled the reference numbers for you. So you sort of see them clumped together, but each reference number has a committee vote and an AFA vote. So we will be filling in the committee votes on this sheet, and this is what I'll use to provide the report back. So we'll be able to walk through each of the reference numbers for the various initiatives and So I'll just give you kind of a brief overview of each one. And then stop to see if the committee has questions, and I certainly defer to the chair on how she wants to proceed with that. So I'll stop and see if anyone has any general questions for me on the process or the report back.
Any questions, committee? I do recommend that we're following along on the white sheet, not so much our green sheet. It's structured a little differently than our green sheet, although you may have taken notes as I did on your green sheet during the AFA hearing. This is what we will be using to follow along about what item we're on and what votes we're on, if that's helpful.
And actually, I do want to point out, I've got some extra copies of the report back documents. So if Lynn might be able to help me out and grab them from the analyst desk where I left them and put them out for the public so that folks can see what the committee is reviewing at the moment. So shall we get started?
Yeah, so the first item is reference number 206. Is that correct?
That is
Lindsay, I'm
correct,
looking
yes.
at the right one. And often these two will go together. So often, if you remember from last time, I would prefer a motion to either move in or out these two items together, 206 and 207, because they are about the same thing. Unless you feel very strongly that you like 206, but not 207, and then just let me know. Okay? So this is continues and makes permanent one public service coordinator position. And using federal funds and a little other special revenue funds as well. You have the Blippy under the justification about what the public service coordinator position does. And so for each one, committee, I'll look to you for discussion or questions regarding those two items, 206 and 207. And then seeing none, and the department is here, anybody's here for clarifications or questions. So I will entertain a motion to have those items moved in or moved out. Would anyone like to make a motion? Representative Webb,
I would like to make the motion to move those two items in.
is there a second? There is a second. Any discussion? Representative McIntyre.
Thank you. This is describing a position and I see the justification for it. Is this position currently filled? And in addition to that, are there any other vacancies that currently exist within this domain that they're trying to fill?
I will invite up a representative from DOER. We have with us today the acting commissioner. Welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Burgess. I'm the acting commissioner of the Maine Department of Energy Resources.
So please, you have some questions before you about is this position filled and what's the vacancy?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. The position is currently filled. And we have currently two generally unrelated vacancies in the office related to a attorney and then an energy policy analyst at the moment.
And acting Commissioner Burgess, I wonder if you just mind sitting there as we
Fine,
go through
happy
the
to.
budget.
So I
'Cause
brought
there
my
may be-
water.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. Any further questions or discussion around this item? The motion on the floor is to move these two items in. And then I will move us to our straw vote. All in favor of moving in items 206 and 207, please raise your hand. One, 2, 3, 4. And those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At the moment, it is 4 to 5. I will also say for folks, if you have to step out to another committee, et cetera, we are accepting votes until 4 o'clock today. So if you have to step away for today's very busy in the legislature, please know. And so we will invite our other committee members to vote. So for both of those, the vote is 4 to 5 at the moment. Great. So we will move on to item 208, which is about providing significant, provides funding to meet a significant need for investment in grid resilience and provides a cost match for estimated 4.4 million in future federal funding. Commissioner, I see that we just got some answers. There was a question by Senator Grahowski, who's chairing tax at the moment. And I'd like folks to see on page 5, there was a question asked by Senator Grahowski, and you were just issued the answer to that question right before the hearing. So I just want to make sure that folks, it is, specifically, do they require a match of state funds for the grid resilience program or just a match? And so Commissioner, did you want to talk a little bit about that answer, just because it had not been at the AFA hearing?
Yes, thank you, Chair Sachs, members of the committee. So we did send along, as the chair mentioned, additional questions or answers to questions that we received this morning. So the grid resilience program, just by way of reorientation, is a federal program, or has been a federal program. It's the section of statute in IIJA is 40101D. So that's kind of the word that's often used, but it's really a grid resilience grant program provided by the federal government. It is a formula fund, meaning every state in the country is allocated a certain amount of funds within this program, and it is a 5-year formula fund program. The department has administered the first 3 years of that program. You have the grant recipients before you, and I have staff here happy to talk about some of the details there. This program, moves forward projects related to, through a competitive RFP, projects related to resiliency. So anything from things like utility pole management, hardening of power lines, undergrounding electrical equipment. There's a long list of, things that are allowed and not allowed by the federal activity. So we've received and programmed and granted out the first 3 years of those funds. Say one project is ultimately not able to move forward, but we are still waiting for fiscal year 4 and 5 of those funds. So in total, out of all those 5 years, we expect to receive around 10.5 million. Some of that is dependent on how the federal government ultimately implements this program. And if should a state choose not to, for example, that might increase what's available to the state. So specifically, the program does require some cost match. And I guess I'd like the member of my team who runs this program to kind of talk to you a little bit more about it, about the cost match and otherwise. But we're envisioning using this $3 million fund to assist with that cost match, but also help us to expand the program. I think in line with the Infrastructure and Rebuilding Committee and other projects, we see this as a good opportunity to expand grid resilience investments across the state.
Committee, would you like to hear from the member who you referenced? You have someone here
Yes.
who can talk a little bit more about it?
Sure.
This is our major, and I would say one of our more major initiatives in the budget. So I'm certainly happy to have that person come up.
Sounds great. I'm Ethan Tremblay from our team, whose
Oh,
team
Ethan.
manages this.
Welcome back, Ethan Tremblay. Hi, Ethan.
Chair Sachs, members of the committee, I'm Ethan Tremblay. I'm the Planning and Policy Manager for the Department of Energy Resources.
So is there additional information that you'd like to add to describe the program and why we are looking for general fund dollars to replace federal dollars in this program?
Yeah, happy to, and I'll get to the kind of specific question about how the cost match is structured. Just to add to what the acting commissioner said, so we're anticipating about $4.4 million will become available from the federal government for the state to apply for. We don't know exactly how much that will be because there's a formula that takes into account like population and size of utilities and other things like that. So they have to kind of rerun that calculation before that money becomes available, hopefully later this year. But based on our past experience, we do expect there will be a cost match required. There's 2 levels of cost match set in this program, and then there's several tiers of cost match within each of them. So I can talk to you about all of that if you'd like. The state is the recipient of the funds. We're required in the past rounds of the program, we were required to provide 15% of the federal dollars as cost match from the state. We then turn around and grant the dollars out to subrecipients, depending on the electricity sales of those subrecipients. They either are required by the federal government to provide either 33% or 100% of the cost match to match whatever amount of the state's dollars we grant to them. Electricity sales, it's like if they're utilities, some utilities don't actually sell electricity. It gets a little bit hard when you're trying to set something for all 50 states to comply with, but their general goal is like smaller recipients have a smaller cost match associated with it. I think the question was whether the state's portion of the cost match could come like from ratepayer funds. Our understanding of the guidance that was issued in the prior 3 years of the program is that is not disallowed, but the department doesn't have access to ratepayer funds. And so it would be administratively difficult to potentially impossible for us to actually do that in implementation. Because essentially what we'd have to do is promise the federal government that we would provide a cost match, which we didn't actually have in hand the way we would if we had general funds or other actual state dollars, turn around and make a grant to a subrecipient, accept a financial obligation from that subrecipient to provide us money that actually we had promised to the federal government, and then turn around and make good on that obligation to the federal government. So it's difficult to envision how we would actually operationalize that effectively. So I did want to be transparent. Our understanding is it is possible that the source of funds could come from somewhere else. It doesn't have to be state general funds under the federal government's rules, but it's difficult to see how we would structure the program to be able to do that effectively. The past cost match that we provided for the first 3 years for the state's portion were general funds.
And may I just ask, was that from a budget line specifically for cost match, or was it more general? Just for, I seem to remember they were more general
Yeah.
cost match. Just if we have federal grants and we need a cost match, this is what it would be used for.
That is correct. I don't think there was a specific budget line that called out grid resilience. I think it was a broader, I think part of the discussion, going back down memory lane a little bit, I think part of the discussion at that point in time was we were sort of in a similar position. We knew the program was coming, but not exactly how much we might need for match at that time. And so there's like a larger allocation to the then governor's energy office, of which a portion we then used for the program once we knew what the match requirement was.
Committee members, questions for Ethan? Representative Kessler?
I'm wondering if you have any sense of if the utilities that you've been working with, if they were to not receive money from this program for these upgrades, what kind of impacts there would be on rates in their utilities? Or how much of an emergency might that create for them, or how much can they absorb that?
Thank you for the question, Representative Kessler. I think it's really, without speaking, putting words into any individual utility's mouth, I'm sure that they would be happy to speak for themselves. But I think generally what we've observed with the applications that we received in the first round of the program is that there's a significant degree of need out there. Some of the projects that we're funding, one of the smaller utilities that we're funding is replacing almost every pole in its service territory with these funds. That's a capital project that obviously doesn't come around every year or really even every decade. It comes around every 50 years or more. And I think, their ability to absorb that level of cost in a short period of time it'd be a real challenge for them to do that. So I think we do recognize that there's a significant amount of need out there. These funds help, right? And I think they do offset funds that otherwise would be asked of ratepayers, which can be a challenge in today's affordability environment, as I know folks know well. So I do think it makes a significant difference, particularly for some of the smaller recipients.
Other questions for Ethan? We have them? Seeing none at the moment. Thank you.
I won't go far.
Committee, this is a fairly big item, and I know I would like to caucus this, but I'm wondering if we can just do the low-hanging fruit pieces and then get through the budget and then caucus for anything remaining. Is that okay with the committee for that approach? Representative Rente, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I just did have a question about the last item. And probably the answer is no. But is it possible for the general fund to basically invoice the utilities for that piece of the cost sharing that the general fund is covering?
Can I just, the cost match, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to answer? Thank you, Ethan.
I'm really tempted to want to say that we'd get back to you, but I know you have a deadline in a couple of hours. So I'll just talk through how I think I understand the question and how I think it would work. I don't think it's possible. So cost match has to be spent as the federal dollars are spent. And so I think we would. I don't think we could. I don't think we could. Because I don't think we have a mechanism to basically, what I'm hung up on is I think that would amount to the department like collecting money from an entity, in that case, a utility. And I don't think we have the ability to do that without some other authority from you all that I would have to go talk to people who understand this better to figure out how to actually tell you to give us that if you wanted to.
Other questions for Ethan? Thank you very much. Committee members, I do want to point to the answers and again, the packet that you received this afternoon. But this was also previously put out, but on page 2, this is a new request for general fund dollars. It is ongoing funding. So the request at the moment is 3 million a year. So it's 6 million added to the baseline. And then there were grant recipients to date for the project, and then a justification about how they came to $3 million. Which if Commissioner Burgess, if you don't mind coming back up for that particular question for folks of, so it was asking I'm sorry to have you, just a little exercise for
Yeah,
y'all,
that's right,
ups
new
and
steps.
downs here. That I understand that DOER received almost $1 million in funding requests, of course, right? There's a pot of money, everybody gonna be like, hey, I have needs. I totally understand that. And that there was oversubscription. However, I would assume that not every you prioritized, and so not everything could be funded, nor perhaps maybe everything should be funded. So I think where I'm struggling a little bit transparently, Commissioner, is that of course there will always be need and there will always be oversubscription to any program that offers funding to communities with frankly not a bad match, 15% or so. So my concern is around the $6 million ongoing in the budget for programs that we are still, is this the right use of general funds to replace federal funds? Do we think there would be federal funds that could come back? And are you worried just about the program in and of itself, or are you just worried about the match because you don't have enough match? Because you can always use more money. Like I get that.
Mhm.
And that's what agencies do. But I guess I'm really wondering about the number and the continuation of the ask.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Sachs. I mean, I think we're putting forward this request, I think in response to, again, the overwhelming request that we have responses to the RFP, and I think general interest of need. I'd say that was a few years ago. And since that time, we've kind of had the Infrastructure and Rebuilding Commission, which talks about finding other sources of funding for projects just like this. So, I think the program has been oversubscribed. There's not a other state source of funding for projects like this that I'm aware of. And so, I think from our perspective, there's been a real demonstration of need to help, communities. And I think that these projects have been to general utilities, and I envision we'll continue to do that. There are also related projects that I think that kind of fall outside of that paradigm, whether it's, could be, microgrid analysis, could be other things like that help from a community resilience. And so I think we think this is, and while we recognize this is a new and ongoing ask, we think it's appropriate given the resiliency and reliability challenges that we're facing.
Other questions for Commissioner Burgess, Representative Foster, and then Representative Brent?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Burgess. So I was curious when I read this, these are all COUs, but are these funds only to be used for COUs?
Thanks, Representative. No, the federal, again, I might ask Mr. Tremblay to come back to describe some of the federal requirements. I think these have predominantly gone to COUs for some of the reasons that we talked about, but they would not only be for COUs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've heard on this committee for quite a few years how well the COUs do, and especially with the rates most of them are able to provide for their ratepayers. When you provided these monies, did anybody look at how much that actually helped to reduce ratepayer rates, or how much they would have increased had they had to do this on their own?
Thanks, Representative. I might ask Mr. Tremblay to come up and provide that information, given there's not a lot of time to come back, if that's okay.
Thanks, Representative, for the question. It's part of what we looked at when we were scoring applications. There's a variety of criteria that were in there, part of them set by the federal government, right? So we had to look at improvements to reliability and resilience, workforce aspects, but affordability, and ultimately that really, when you're considering a utility, affordability means helping lower or offset increases to their ratepayers' costs was a portion of the scoring and is part of what we looked at on it. The funding, the federal government doesn't require that the dollars are like a 1-for-1 offset for money that otherwise would be spent by ratepayers. Part of that is that it's hard to know exactly when it would have otherwise been spent by ratepayers, and part of it is that they're trying to use the funding to incentivize behavior, like maybe get incremental reliability or resilience benefits that ratepayers would be glad to have, but wouldn't necessarily pay for under the normal paradigm, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tremblay. So the federal government doesn't make any distinction between a COU or an IOU when they match these funds either.
No, not directly. The distinction that's built into the program, at least under the prior program design, and this could change, but I think it's unlikely to, at least significantly. They made a distinction between their terminology was large utilities and small utilities, and then in every document they made the clarification that they didn't limit it just to utilities, but they were using that as the word. The distinction was based on whether the entity sold or transacted 4 million megawatt hours of electricity per year, more or less. And if it was less than that, they were what the federal government called a small utility. Their cost match was only 33%. If they were more than that, federal government called them a large utility. The cost match requirement was 100%. So in Maine, if memory serves, all of our COUs or municipal utilities would fall below that threshold and be small utilities by this program's definition. Both of the IOUs would be large utilities. So it's kind of matches our intuition, I think, but it wasn't specifically, nothing the federal government said as a condition was specifically based on like the ownership structure of the utility. And we're able to make awards. In fact, we did make an award, which wasn't able to move forward because the subrecipient wasn't able to proceed, but we are able to make awards to entities that aren't utilities. So in that instance, it was a microgrid provider that was working with a tribal nation on a project. It was a pretty great project, but unfortunately the vendor themselves wasn't able to proceed.
So, Representative Rente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you just answered my question. The leverage ratio for the small is basically 1-to-3, and it's a 1-to-1 ratio for the bigger utilities.
Correct.
Additional questions for either the commissioner or for Mr. Tremblay? See none, thank you. So committee members, we certainly, I certainly would appreciate the opportunity to have a corner caucus about this item before we proceeded. Is it okay for committee members if we move on for the moment? And then you have a chance to also talk a little bit. Thank you. Okay, so we will come back to that one. Sorry, Lindsay, I know we're not going right in order, but close. We're close. There we go. All right, so folks, we'll go on now to page 2 of 9. And I note here, this one is a transfer of all other funding. So this was funding that was allocated during the prior budgets and so it's just moving it from the governor's energy office to this new DOER. So there's a $1.5 million per year allocation, moving it to DOER, and then reference number 270 is the deallocation from one to another. So this is literally paperwork transferring one to another, from one entity to another. Did I say that correctly, Lindsay? Yes, okay. Looking at the commissioner. So any questions about this? Any discussion, committee members? Thank you to the commissioner and DOER for reminding us what that was for. But this is money that was already appropriated in a prior budget, and it is simply moving it from the former entity to the current entity, basically, for paperwork purposes. So Any questions, committee? Any discussion or a motion? Representative Kessler?
Vote to move it in.
Okay, and would you like to move in reference 209 and reference 270 at the
Yes.
same time? Okay. We have a motion to move in 209 and 270. Is there a second to that? Representing, so page 5 would have if I heard that correctly, if you look in the middle, page 5, reference 270. Thank you, Lindsay, for the wonderful labeling that you've done. Is the deallocation. So there's an allocation and a deallocation. So they match. And so we're moving the two of them in together. Does that work for folks? Everybody there? Feel okay about that? Okay. Any other discussion at this time? Seeing none, all those in favor of moving in reference number 209 and 270, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. And all of those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So that one is done. Okay. So we will move on to reference number 210, which is transferring one commissioner of the Department of Energy Resources from federal to general funds, both for the commissioner and the deputy commissioner. So you see there's a general fund allocation and then a deallocation within the federal expenditures fund. I will note for the committee that there was some additional information regarding this particular item. First, there was conversation on page 3 around this initiative. And then there is also additional information on page 4 of this packet that we just got in today. And so Commissioner, I wonder if you mind walking through just so folks have time to skim that information, but also be aware of the new questions that were asked regarding the commissioner and deputy commissioner moving from federal funds to general funds, if you could, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Sachs. So the initiative, as described, currently salaries for the commissioner of DOER and the deputy commissioner of DOER are paid for using federal funds out of a program. Again, it is a formula fund called the State Energy Program. Every state energy office is a recipient of funds from the State Energy Program across the country. These are funds appropriated by Congress and then ultimately administered by the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy. I think some of the information you'll find in this follow-up packet is around State Energy Program funds. And I think, we're putting this proposal forward as the department moves forward. We think from a certainty perspective, it makes sense to have the leadership of the department paid for using general funds and not be contingent on should U.S. Congress act on State Energy Program funds. I will say the current administration's federal budget started with zeroing out the State Energy Program funding. So there is some risk. We're aware that a couple states have not received their federal funds from last year, and we have yet to receive our application for State Energy Program funds for this year. So the timing, certainty, and amount are all certainly, things that we work through and deal with at the department. And so we think it makes sense to move these salaries going forward to the general fund. Our plan is to continue, should this move forward, is to continue to use this to support a position within our office who does state energy security work, but also ongoing analyses of the office. I think, the intent really is to use this more for projects and the staff working on discrete projects, given some of the uncertainty. So as we think about, again, the state energy security plan that we have to do, but other matters related to other activities and reports of the federal government. I will also note that Congress is actively considering a new requirement of State Energy Office that would increase the amount of requirements of the state energy security plan. And I think there's general bipartisan support, at least among the states, that that's a good idea. So, but we think having this kind of fund go to support that, or the State Energy Program to support that, makes sense given the uncertainty that we're seeing.
Thank you, Commissioner. And so it some of the questions that I'm reading, it sounded like folks were saying, well, why couldn't you just direct this to other personnel? And your answer to that was because of the uncertainty of these, either the amount, but also if you'll get them at all. Is that, am I hearing that correctly?
Thanks, Chair Sachs. Let me clarify a little bit. I think our plan is to do that. We're, managing and waiting on, many different federal funding accounts which we're trying to match folks up to. So that is part of our plan. I think what I'm trying to say is that, because of some of the really, uncertainty of timing and otherwise, it may be more project specific. So, 10 or 20% of a person's time, where they might be working on a discrete project as opposed to just, okay, this person's entire salary. Just to really diversify the funding sources that we have for our team.
Thank you for that. Questions for the commissioner on this particular line? All right, Representative Warren, would you like to introduce yourself at the same time?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. My name is Sophie Warren. I'm fortunate to represent a small but mighty portion of Scarborough in the main house. And thank you for being here. I wanted to just ask you, my concern there would be that you may receive a difference of $3 million. And so it would seem to me that that should, in some way, if we're going to assume that it will not be coming, that it should go back to the general fund if you do receive it. So that's sort of my question there. If there's, ultimately, it would seem like you should receive the amount of funding that we allocate, but not more than that. And I appreciate that it's a question of whether you receive the federal funds or not, but it wouldn't make sense to me that we would be allocating a certain amount of resources and then maybe you'll receive quite a significant amount more than that. Does that make sense?
I do want to direct that we are talking about the SEP, not the Grid Resiliency Plan grant program.
Well, I thought we were talking about if the funding for these, for the position of the heads of the new department would be funded by the federal government or by the state. Yeah.
Just making sure we were right, because the $3 million is in the grant resilience program, which we did talk about a wee minute before you got here. We are now just on the other line item, 210, which is on page 2 of 9. We did not vote on the grid resilience program yet, but just so you know.
Oh, sure. Then I'm sorry, but I guess my question is if there's a question with this piece of funding, if we're concerned that it's not going to come, I thought that's why we were going to move it into the general fund at the state level. And so if we do so, there could be, and it is funded by the federal government, then that money would not be needed from the general fund. And so I'm trying to ask what's the plan for that money. It would seem that it wouldn't make sense for the department to retain that funding. It should go to other programs in the state, in the general fund. And I just wanted to confirm you agree with that, and where's the language to confirm that?
Thanks, Representative Chair Sachs. So so separate from the $3 million grid resilience grant program is the $564,000 appropriate or fund that we received from the federal government, the state energy program that is funding commissioner, deputy commissioner, and another person's salary currently. What we're suggesting is moving the commissioner and deputy commissioner off of that, right? And so that would free up some of those funds for other activities. As you can see, we kind of just provided this to folks, but some of what we're suggesting is that we use those additional funds to continue to fund the salary, but then also kind of project specific work of some of the team members. So take this state energy security plan as an example. We would kind of fund that work and that discrete work out of the state energy program budget. I think some of the other things we're dealing with, again, around the uncertainty and timing is, potential requests from the federal government of what we can and can't use that money for. We are aware that some states have said, okay, you can apply for these funds, but you can't do anything on clean energy or heat pump adoption, for example. So there are other kind of federal requirements that we're trying to work through and meet for the state energy program. And So I think it makes sense to have the deputy commissioner and commissioner salaries move to the general fund and then have this flexibility to kind of manage the remainder of the funds on a project by project. And, again, kind of trying to diversify the staffing that we have. I mean, we've got, out of the staff that we have, the majority of them are paid for by federal funds. And so this kind of, flexibility, I think helps us in that manner too.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but both on that piece and on the 3 million, it doesn't make sense to me to maybe have an additional 500,000 or then an additional 3.5 million that you may or may not be able to use. It doesn't, that's not something that I would support. So I guess just to put a flag up that it's difficult for me to hear that just in thinking about planning and clarity about what the department is doing, what it expects to do, what it needs to do its job. If it could do its job sufficiently with 3.5 million less dollars, then that's important for me to understand in understanding your budget proposal. And I certainly am kind of concerned about that, trying to make sense of that more, in part because there's so many diverse needs that we have as a state in a really difficult time fiscally. It's hard to feel like we're kind of doing what we need to do and no more than that. And there's so many places that are maybe questioning different cuts to things, that this would be a place that we've got to make sure we're doing what we need to do, but not more than that, if that makes sense. So maybe that's more of a comment than a question, but I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Welcome to respond if you wish.
Yeah, thanks, Representative. I think I just really want to be clear that, we're proposing the 3 million for what we talked about before, for what we think are real needs in the state to improve resiliency and reliability in rural communities and consumer-owned utilities and otherwise. Separate from that, we think just from the long-term security of the office, it does, and kind of the federal uncertainty that we are seeing with tens of millions of dollars that we've applied for and received that we have yet to come in from, that we need to be able to implement should they come in. And so the planning on that, I think, is so again, the ability for the leadership of the department to be paid for in the same way that it's happening in other departments. I think kind of separating those two, I think it just makes sense to have the deputy commissioner and commissioner paid for with general funds. Yeah.
That's not my question. And sorry, because it's probably me that's been unclear, that you could or could not have this money. And if we're making these decisions, as you were talking about earlier, because of timing and unpredictability from the federal government, then should it all turn out the best case scenario, what does that mean for those state dollars? And it's concerning to me that it could be that there's $3.5 million that you may have or may not have additional, because I would want to see that used elsewhere if all the best case scenario turns out the way it does. So thank you.
Thanks, Representative. Just so so we're hoping to receive $4.4 million in grid resilience funds from the federal government. We still see the $3 million a year as something that we're prioritizing to advance reliability and resiliency. So regardless of the federal funds, we're seeking this $3 million based on kind of the oversubscription of the program and what we think would be opportunities to fund more resiliency projects.
Representative Frente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is the grid resilience funding fungible? In other words, is it applicable to salaries? I mean, there's discussion here seems to be that there's a 3.5 million pot, but is the 3 million for grid resilience actually separate from and not able to be used on the salary side?
Thanks, Representative. I mean, it's our intent to use the $3 million to program for projects, not, maybe there's some small administrative fee or some of the cost mesh that we talked about, but the intent and certainly what we put forward here is not to have that go to department salaries or other things, but for a grid resilience program that funds projects in communities.
Yeah, I just meant, are you allowed to do that? In other words, are there limits on the federal funds that would say you got to do it to the grid resilience program.
Federal funds. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Representative. So the federal funds, the 401(d) program, the grid resilience program, those are limited to that program.
Hello, Mr. Russo. And I'll just have a nod from you, Commissioner, that SEP is similarly designated to certain functions. It happens to cover salaries, but you can't use it over here for something else. It's designated funding. I'm just,
Yes, Madam Chair, they are somewhat flexible, but they have certain, federal requirements of direction. And I think what I'm trying to say is that we're seeing even more strings being put on those where states are being told, don't spend these on these types of projects, spend them on these other types of projects. So that's what we're trying to, also meet the federal requirements there.
thank you. And we welcome our wonderful analysts from Office of Fiscal and Public Policy.
Hi, everyone.
Program
Michael
Review.
Russo from the Office of Fiscal and Program Review. Just a clarifying statement. When you're talking about federal funding and how the state allocates that federal funding, it's really kind of a two-step process. The federal government decides to provide those funds to the state. You as the legislature authorize how they're going to be spent. So when you have a budget document in front of you and it has a federal funds allocation, you're choosing to say, this is how you can use the federal funds that you've been provided. And if you're looking through the little lines, you can only use it on specific things. So if you provide federal funds for all other expenses, which is all other, you can't use it on personal services, which are salary, retirement, benefits. You'd have to get, they'd have to get permission from you at the legislature, either through another budget document or, if applicable, a financial order to do that. But you can't just switch the funds that you've previously told them how to use. So if they want to change that source of funding or they want to change where that money is going, it would require additional approval from you. That's the budget document itself is how you would do that. So in this specific example, you would previously authorize them to spend federal expenditures funds and other special revenue funds on these positions. They're proposing to switch to the general fund. You're either approving or not approving it, but they can't go ahead and then say, but we're going to use these other funds someplace else. They'd have to come back to you to get additional approval to do that. So there'll always be that kind of check on your part of being able to review that expenditure.
Questions, Representative Warren? You have a question for Mr. Russo? Yes.
So thank you. I'm going to try this question a different way because I may not be being clear enough. There seem to be two proposals in this section of our budget decisions that are asking us to cover either in the event that federal funding doesn't come through or as a supplement to that funding if whether or not it comes through. And so if that understanding is correct, my question is, can we make this allocation conditional on if federal funding is received, that money will be returned to the general fund. If it's not received, it will be allocated for the purpose that we vote and is instructed. I'm not trying to, make a claim about those federal dollars because I understand that piece of it as much as I can. It's about the general funds and wanting to be as thoughtful as possible in the face of the myriad issues that we're dealing with as a state and wanting to make the best use of those resources.
Sure. You as the policy committee have a couple of options. I'm not endorsing one or the other. I'm just providing them to you. Have to say that up front. These are ongoing general fund requests. You could choose to make them one time in your report back or amend the proposal to do so. You'd be saying to AFA, we think this should be one time given the uncertainty. You could also take a close look at Part RR, which typically speaking, when you provide a general fund appropriation to a department, those funds are returned at the end of the year if they're unused. Part RR allows those funds to continue to stay with the Department of Energy Resources, which would make a lot of sense in a lot of situations. If you wanted to amend this specific initiative to withhold those funds, you would be able to do so, make that recommendation to AFA. Again, not endorsing either one, but those are the options you would have available to.
Other questions for Mr. Russo? Representative Wadsworth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nice to see you, Mr. Russo. How many dollars from the budget stabilization fund are being brought over to the general fund for this budget?
I would have to get back to you with that information. I don't have it off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Could you?
Other questions for Mr. Russo about the EUT portion of the budget? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Russo. We appreciate you being here. Friends, we have lost our senator. We have no senators. So even for straw votes, I don't like to take them without a senator present. So what I propose is, since it's a little after 2 and we had talked about non-wires alternative, I saw Commissioner Scully come in and come out. I proposed tabling the rest of this discussion, having our non-wires alternative report, and then coming back to the budget. So I move to table LD 2212. And all those in favor? Good. Any opposed? Representative Paul, yeah, I just want to get over with. Yeah, I get you. So we'll just take a 5-minute break so that we can get the materials out for non-wires alternative and hopefully get Commissioner Scully back in here as well. Thanks, folks.
Call the Energy Utilities and Technology Committee back together. I think, am I the only new person? Okay. I am State Senator Mark Lawrence, representing Southern York County. I represent the towns of South Berwick, Elliott, York, Kittery, and Agunquit. And I am the Senate co-chair of the committee. We are now going to have a report presentation from the Public Utilities Commission on non-wire alternative assessment pursuant to Public Law 2025-293. So I'll invite the PUC up.
Senator Lawrence, Representative Sachs, members of the committee. My name is Pat Scully. I'm one of the 3 commissioners at the Maine Public Utilities Commission. And with me is Paulina Collins, one of our experienced attorneys who was actually took the lead in conducting this inquiry and kind of navigating the process with all the parties who participated. So you've got the report that we issued effective March 1, and I think there's also a slide show that Paulina is going to cover, and I'll turn it over to her to describe the process that we went through and what our conclusions were as outlined in the report.
Okay. Senator Lawrence, Representative Sachs, members of the Energy Utilities and Technology Committee, I'm Paulina Collins with the Public Utilities Commission. And as Commissioner Scully mentioned, I'm just going to kind of talk to you a little bit about the process we use to implement the legislative directive that you all gave us to do an assessment of the non-wires alternative review process, and talk a little bit about the report's conclusions. And so we identified 3 relatively minor suggested statutory changes where there was some consensus with the stakeholders in the inquiry process that we had. And we proposed statutory language and attached that to the report. Then there were a number of other issues that were more complicated, areas where there wasn't necessarily consensus. And that could be either because stakeholders had very different views on the issue or thought that this could benefit from more time in a, say, a subsequent PUC proceeding. So on those issues, the commission intends to continue to engage with stakeholders and work on those issues. So the legislative directive, as you know, is Public Law 2025, Chapter 293. And you all directed the commission in consultation with the Office of the Public Advocate and the Efficiency Maine Trust to review the non-wires alternative investigation and recommendation process. And included in that was to assess the efficiency of the process and consider how the non-wires alternative process is, or, you know, maybe incorporated with the more recent integrated grid planning that you all know that we're in the middle of right now. The legislation directed us to include an opportunity for stakeholder comment and that the commission would develop recommendations and a report to this committee by March 1st. So the process that we used to do that was we had 2 initial consultation meetings with the OPA and the trust to talk about potential changes or thoughts on the current process. And our sort of thought was to do an inquiry proceeding to gather input from stakeholders. And so then we opened a notice of inquiry and we sought input on a number of questions, including, you know, are there ways to improve the efficiency of the process? And are there sort of legislative changes? And are there things that the commission could do? Are there regulatory changes that the commission could make? We sought stakeholder views on, you know, integration with the integrated grid process and issues that had come up in litigated cases. So we've had a number of years since the non-wires alternative statute was implemented. So we've had a couple cases at the commission. So we'd had a list of sort of issues that we thought would also sort of merit just some sort of exploration as we were undertaking this process. So slide 4, the proposed legislation that's in the report, the commission offers 3 possible amendments attached to the report. And the first is to give the commission authority to adopt rules regarding the non-wires alternative process. And the second one is to require the investor-owned T&D utilities to submit their 5-year planning studies for small transmission and distribution projects to the commission in addition to the OPA, which is what the statute currently provides. And then the last one involves the procurement plan that the statute requires that the non-wires alternative coordinator provide when they're making a non-wires alternative recommendation. And so the suggested language there is that the non-wires alternative coordinator's procurement plan would include, identify the components of the proposed solution that are either behind the meter or on the grid side of the meter. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So now I thought I'd just talk a little bit about kind of how we came to these suggestions through the inquiry process that we had. So with respect to the rulemaking authority, there was a lot of sort of comments in the inquiry that it might be helpful for some sort of formalization or commission imposed requirements on the non-wires alternative process. So for example, numerous stakeholders, including Natural Resources Council of Maine, the Acadia Center, the Public Advocate, the Trust, CMP, all suggested or supported that the commission make more information about this process available through its case management system. And the reason for that is the way this process currently works now, under the statute, the utility is to provide information to the OPA and the trust to enable it to do the non-wires alternative investigation. And that process does not happen inside a commission docketed proceeding. It happens before something arrives at the commission. And so on the one hand, it's the commission's not really involved in that process, so we don't totally know exactly how that's going. But a number of parties thought, as a means of trying to increase transparency in how this process works and improve the efficiency of the process, that at least certain information, and particularly maybe for the larger projects, that we utilize our CMS to help facilitate that exchange of information. And so that could include, setting deadlines like we do with, discovery and regular, in the regular adjudicatory cases. It could include things like standardizing certain filing or reporting requirements that the utilities do as part of this process. And it could include formalizing the non-wires alternative benefit cost analysis methodology. So under the statute, that's part of the investigation. And a number of parties, including NRCM, the Acadia Center, and CMP, thought it would be helpful for the commission to formalize that process because it is one of the issues that has come up in litigated cases where some parties disagree. So again, these types of changes were designed to sort of increase transparency and improve the efficiency of the process. And the commission's idea was to do an inquiry proceeding. We often do that, as you know, before we do a rulemaking to kind of work out the details and have the best sort of proposed rule before we put it out. And then so this all kind of stemmed to our suggestion for giving us the rulemaking authority to follow that inquiry proceeding.
Mr. Chair, can I ask Paulina a
Representative
clarifying question? Thank you so much. I just want to make sure I'm following on. So your draft legislation is at the end of this packet
Yes.
of the actual report.
Yes.
And that, even though it says first recommendation, that goes to number 3,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. When I was
Okay.
sitting here in the room,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are 3 recommendations and they may not be lined up exactly with the
With the
PowerPoint
legislation,
presentation.
yeah.
Right.
Okay, so this was regarding the justification for the recommendation under section 3 of the draft legislation, if everybody is following along at home. Okay, thanks. Just wanted to clarify for my
Yes,
own.
yes.
Thanks. Thank you.
So I'm on slide 7. So another one of the suggestions from the commission relates to section 3132B, which governs smaller transmission projects and distribution projects. So that statute requires the utilities to submit 5-year planning studies to the OPA for the non-wires alternative coordinator review. And CMP has been voluntarily filing these with the commission as a courtesy for a number of years. Versant, for the first time, filed its study with the commission this year. And so there were some suggestions in the inquiry docket including from the OPA and the trust, suggesting that the commission should also review these 5-year planning studies and maybe set deadlines because they may be coming in at different times. Utilities may be filing them as a courtesy with the commission, they may not. And that to the extent, hypothetically, if one of these 5-year planning studies or a party didn't think that it included all the information that the statute requires, then the commission could enforce a supplemental filing, for example. So that led us to the second recommendation to amend section 3132B1 to require that these 5-year planning studies under that statutory section be filed with the commission in addition to the OPA. Then the next one, section 3132C4 requires the non-wires alternative coordinator, when recommending a non-wires alternative, to include a proposed plan for its procurement, which must be consistent with 3132D. Now, a number of stakeholders thought this language could benefit from some clarification, and this is another issue that has come up in litigated cases at the commission. And what I mean by that is the level of detail that should be in that procurement plan. So section 3132D establishes requirements for non-wires alternative procurement when the commission determines that a non-wires alternative is appropriate. And under that statutory section, it basically just says if the non-wires alternative is on the customer side of the meter, so behind the meter, then the utility will contract with the trust to deliver the non-wires alternative through the trust program. If it's on the grid side of the meter, the commission shall determine the entity, which could be the utility or it could be a third party that would deliver the non-wires alternative, and then make orders as necessary, which we haven't done this yet, but that sort of suggests that there would be, a commission proceeding to work out those details for the non-wires alternative under that scenario. So, and like I said, based on the inquiry comments, the commission recommends just slightly tweaking the language to address that confusion that has sort of come up in cases about, well, what does that procurement plan actually look like? And for example, in one of the cases we had, the trust was saying, well, it doesn't really necessarily make sense for us to develop a fully proposed procurement plan if we don't know if the non-wires alternative is going to be approved by the commission. And similarly, when we had this inquiry, CMP had a very similar view and said, what we read the statute to say the non-wires alternative coordinator's procurement plan just identifies what part of the solutions are behind the meter, what part are on the grid side of the meter, because different things flow from that under the statutory section. So that is that section. And then, as I mentioned, there were a number of issues that stakeholders thought would benefit from more discussion. So there wasn't generally, consensus on these issues. And that, like I said, is for different reasons. Parties either have different views or thought that we needed more time to delve into those issues. And that includes things like whether current exclusions for certain projects. So certain projects are not required to have a non-wires alternative investigation. And that was, the legislature did that, and they had the commission do a rulemaking for that. So these are more sort of investments, more aligned to traditional investments. And so there was a question about whether that scope of projects that doesn't have to have a non-wires alternative investigation, should that be expanded or should it be narrowed? And then some of the parties also had other suggestions, potential suggestions, which we didn't have time to totally get into, about, were there other changes to the statutory sections that could help improve the process? And I think some of the stakeholders said, we think some of these ideas are good ones and they would merit further discussion in another proceeding. And then another issue was the role of the non-wires alternative coordinator. Some of the stakeholders have different views on that. So the commission intends to continue to engage with stakeholders on those issues, and we could bring back additional recommendations if we go ahead to do the inquiry and the rulemaking proceeding. We could bring back additional information or make the committee aware of it to the extent we have more recommendations that come out of that process.
Great. Are there questions for Attorney Collins from the committee? Representative Runte?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So far, there's been no NWA projects that have come through the system. At least that's my understanding.
So at least that's true that have come to the commission.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, the commission did approve a non-wires alternative, a non-wires alternative in one of the adjudicatory cases that I mentioned. But then things happened and then the non-wires alternative was no longer, it wouldn't work. And so, and then there was another case where the commission went with the rebuild over the non-wires alternative. So, but there are certain projects that could have non-wires alternatives that don't come to the commission. And that's under the section of the statute, which is 3132B. Those are the smaller transmission and distribution projects, because the statute provides, you know, if the trust and the non-wires alternative coordinator and the OPA, and the utility agree on something, they can go forward and do that. If they don't agree, either the OPA, I think, or the utility could bring it to us. And we haven't had that happen yet.
Follow up, Representative Runte?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the draft legislation, there's basically section 3 is a sentence. And while there may not necessarily be a consensus, there seems to be some agreement that examination of the scope of NWA as opposed to what it was set up to be in the first place versus where the authority that it currently has, the cost benefit analysis, standardization, and data flows. I'm just wondering if this one sentence proceeding or inquiry that's contemplated might have some more specificity with regard to the top 3 or 4 issues that you might think are the reason why it is where it is.
I'm sorry, Representative Randy, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Were you asking, are you asking about I'm sorry, can you just repeat the last part of your question?
I'm just wondering in section 3, where you talk about the rules and the ability to go that contemplates some sort of proceeding, that this one sentence be broadened to be more specific about several key topics that need to be examined that came up as in the assessment of the efficiency of the process. And the things that come to mind are, is the scope right? Is the authority right? Is the cost benefit analysis right? Is the way data is shared or structured right? I mean, they all seem like specific possibilities that maybe ought to be made more clear in terms of the direction of what the rulemaking might be.
Right. So I think we contemplated that too when we were drafting the legislation. You know, should it say including but not limited to, and identify a couple of key topics? So I think it could be either way, Representative Runte. You know, I think in the end we just decided to leave it broad, but I think, you know, it could be written either way.
It's fair to say that there was a fair amount of consensus about the benefit of having more transparency in terms of where the information was placed, when it was placed, and some rules around the process, the timing, who does what, when, those kinds of things, which this would allow for. There was a whole lot less consensus about some of the other issues that you mentioned, Representative, about things like how do we determine what the correct methodology is for the best benefit cost analysis? Should the scope and role and responsibility of the NWA coordinator be expanded or not? And this wouldn't preclude us from pursuing those issues in a rulemaking, but it doesn't. We didn't suggest itemizing those more controversial issues expressly here. Obviously, if the legislature wants us to pursue those questions more fully, we can do so.
Senator Runte?
I just one final question. I have to ask, I mean, is a barrier to having a successful program the absence of consensus on some of these things? And is consensus necessarily the top priority? Or do you just go about saying, hey, we really need a standardized cost benefit analysis?
Well, I don't think consensus is the ultimate objective. I think, we have a process that has worked reasonably well, despite the fact that we don't have a lot of NWA projects that have come through the commission. So I think that there were improvements that we felt we could certainly make through the rulemaking proceeding. But there is no question but that there are still some open issues that we could address if we were directed to address them, or we could initiate on our own. And the benefit cost analysis is one. I think the parties recognize that we don't have a clear methodology that's been established yet, and we certainly could work towards establishing one if that's the directive.
Other questions? Okay, Commissioner, is your intent that you would like this submitted as part of my omnibus bill? Is that the intent?
Yes.
Okay. So we will do that and we will put it on for tomorrow. I'll do it as an amendment. And then I'm sure Representative Runte can propose any amendment to it he may want to, and we can have that debate. So about whether, but you're saying your preference, the commission's preference is not to be directed on what to do, but to leave it broad so you can have the discretion on what to do.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is that the whole shebang?
That's full shebang.
That's the whole shebang. Okay. That's for Representative McIntyre. That's a legislative term, shebang.
Thank you. I was just also wondering if you could clarify between an Omni and a minibus.
Go ahead.
Back in.
Yep.
So, so to note that Lindsay, I believe you'd said you would send out to interested parties proposed amendments to 897 this afternoon or this evening. So because we do have a public hearing on LD 897 tomorrow. And you just, and I always look to the end and say, you understood that that Senator Lawrence would like to add that now to 897.
Yes, so I will send out an email to the interested parties when we conclude today, letting them know that the recommended legislation that came out of that report is something that the senator would like to include and will be addressing in his testimony at the public hearing.
Senator, was there anything else that you were putting in 897? I know there was some discussion around adding that one portion from 1966 into 897 regarding the solar ownership.
You're talking about Z?
Yes.
Okay, so I did, when I told Lindsay I wanted to do this, I did mention that. I don't think we have to distribute that as an amendment because we've already heard the issue, but I'd kind of leave it up to the committee if it wanted to put Z into the bill.
Okay.
So fair warning, Z may go into the bill if the committee desires, but no other bombs that I know of.
So the email I send out will just be addressing the language that came out of the NWA report for now, and then.
Okay, we're all clear. Becoming a bigger bus as we go along, Representative. Yes. All right. Mega bus. All right. So
An
committee.
omnibus.
An omnibus. So committee, we would like to reopen the work session for LD 2212. I don't see, committee, I should have started with language part TT because the good representative from FAME, Mr. Norbert, was here to talk about TT. When he comes back in, we will immediately take up that section, but if not, we can move along on our budget document. For those who are not here for those initial votes, we did vote in or out a few items. So we just ask that you check in with Lindsay and record your votes if you weren't here for a few of the items. So we had just discussed at length references 210, 211, and 212 on page 2 of 9. We're just putting that to the side at the moment so that folks can caucus that along with the reference 208. So now we are on page 3 of 9, reference 213, which provides funding for the approved reorganization of one public service manager 2 position from range 32 to 33 from the general fund. This is a normal reorganization. So I wanted to remind the committee that for each item, we will take a motion to move an item in or move an item out. And so questions, discussion, or a motion on reference number 213. Representative Kessler.
Motion to move it in.
Is there a second? Representative Webb. Any further discussion regarding moving in reference 213? And Senator, we're just raising hands, nothing formal here. We're just doing straw votes. Ready to proceed. All those in favor of moving reference number 213 in, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's fine. Okay, we will now go to reference number 217, which transfers all other funding from this particular program, again, from what it looks like from, this is one of those going from GO to Department of Energy Resources. Again, there's an appropriation and then a deallocation. So and if you can see on, thank you again to Lindsay, on page 5 is the deallocation. So I would prefer to have a motion for both references 217 and 279 or discussion regarding them. Representative Webb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make the motion to do the appropriate shuffling between those two items.
So you're moving both 217 and 279 in? Yes. Is there a second on that motion? Representative Warren. Any discussion, committee, regarding transferring that $500 allocation and deallocating? Seeing none, all those in favor of moving 217 and 279 in? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And those opposed? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Okay. So we will move on to the next page of number 4. Again, the same thing for this particular program of the Maine Offshore Wind Renewable Energy going from GO to DOER with the appropriate deallocation on page 5 of number 281. I would ask for a motion to move them either in or out for 219 and 281. Representative Webb?
I would like to move to allocate 219 and deallocate for 281. Correct.
Move those in. Is there a second? Representative Rente. Any further discussion? Representative Warren, question?
This probably doesn't matter, but there is a little typo. Is that dealt with usually?
In the blippies, you mean?
Yeah.
Don't worry about the blippies.
Okay.
Is that true? I don't see Mr. Russo still here, but Lindsay?
Is it just a spelling mistake or is this like a number issue?
Just that development A program.
Oh, yeah, don't worry about that. It'll get taken care of by Ross.
Good question. Good catch. Okay, so we have a motion to move into references 219 and 281. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of moving those in, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and all those opposed. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Moving on to the next one, which is reference 215, which is again moving the Offshore Wind Research Consortium Fund from GO to DOER with the appropriate deallocation on page 6, reference 277. So I would like to have a motion for references 215 and 277 together. Representative Webb.
I would like to move the two items in.
Is there a second? Representative Kessler, any discussion from the committee? Seeing none, all in favor of moving in 215 and 277, please raise your hands. Loud and proud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And those opposed, loud and proud. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. All right. So making sure we have then taken care of on page 5 of 9, we have taken care of the top reference 279 already. We have taken care of 270 already. We've taken care of 281 already. And then we've taken care of 277. See, look at that. We just got through a bunch of pages. Look at that. All right. We are now on to language parts. So the first language part is RR. Lindsay, I don't know if you want to talk about that. This is the part authorizes any unexpended balances in the Department of Energy Resources General Fund account to carry and not lapse. That's nothing more to say. Okay. Committee, is there any questions that you have regarding this section? If you would like anybody, Representative Foster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering if we could find out what the expected amount would be that would carry over.
Could we have a representative from the department to come up and answer that question?
Thank you, Chair Lawrence, Chair Sachs, Representative Foster. I mean, it's our intent that there would not be a carryover. We work really hard to program funds as much as we can. This gives us the flexibility, should there be delays in a procurement issue or an appeal or otherwise, that would allow us to kind of carry those funds over. But we, work hard to obligate and spend as much as we can, but this would give us that flexibility should there be a need to carry over.
Representative Foster.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And just out of curiosity, currently with your group, is there any carryover anticipated from the current budget years?
Thanks, Representative. This came up recently with some research consortium funds that we were, going through the process and through the advisory committee and identifying progress. Ultimately, instead of doing 3 RFPs, we ended up doing 1 RFP together. There were some delays and appeals in that process. And so that's a recent example of what we've gone through with regards to that. I don't think we're anticipating any funds for that carryover for this year, but I want to maybe phone a friend just to make sure I'm getting you the right answer given the late hour. Yeah. So we're not anticipating any federal funds. This is just for flexibility.
Representative Warren.
Thank you so much. This is a question for Lindsay. Should I wait or can I ask? Okay, thank you. If I'm interested to consider how to condition if there's federal money that's received for certain pieces, and if not, would it return to the general fund? Is this a section to consider that through, or is there another opportunity that makes more sense?
I think it depends upon the circumstances. So the committee has talked about the $3 million ongoing appropriation. You've also talked about moving the funding for the salaries of the commissioner and deputy commissioner from federal funds to general fund money. I think specifically if you were looking to, for example, with the $3 million ongoing appropriation, this is where this language I think could be used, where you might, I don't know how that would look drafted, but essentially what you'd be saying, assuming you wanted to keep this for other funds that they've received, maybe there'd be a mechanism to say essentially, notwithstanding this, funds that were received for the grid resiliency program shall revert back to the general fund. So there would be a mechanism to do that. I also do want to flag for the committee, substantially similar language to this is included in, and the LD number is escaping me, but the Department of Energy Resources sort of final cleanup bill. So
2150.
Thank you, 2150. So similar language appears there as well. 2053. Hey,
Sorry.
you better than I did. So just wanted to flag that as well.
And committee members, I suggest again that we don't let everybody go back and talk about this one, that we're getting the information now, that we hold off on this in TT until you've had your caucus time and then come back. So I just want to double check if there's any questions for part RR at the moment before we go on to TT. Thank you. I will just note also, I had been asked, is this quote normal language? If you notice in last year's budget, DAFs did it for all of their programs. And then in other places, such as IF&W has a few, Ag has a few where it is specific to a certain fund that carries over. Others departments do it whole cloth like DAF. So it really does depend on the agency and committee. Okay. Okay to move on to TT, and I see Mr. Norbert's here as well. Thank you for that. So, wanted to have the department come. This was language part TT was not included in our AFA, hearing, but then Lindsay flagged for us. Thank you that, we are, to vote on this today. And so wanted to have a really robust discussion about TT, what it is. And I'd like to start with the department, and then Mr. Norbert from FAME had testified, and I watched that testimony and I sent it, I know, to at least our crew. And I know Lindsay, you had sent his testimony as well, regarding FAME's portion of TT. And then the PUC is here as well. So we are all here to get some information. And I know it was also, excuse me, and also included in the packet on page 5 for the committee around why are you requesting the language change? So if we could start with the department to talk about why is this change necessary?
Thank you, Chair Sachs. As we've kind of laid out in this memo, and as you've said, Part TT would authorize sections of lapse or kind of that had sunset, where dates have gone by for using FAME's authority to finance energy projects. And so in our conversations over the past few months with the team from FAME, we have recognized that lapse, but have interest in the potential for FAME to potentially use this as a tool in the toolbox for financing projects in order to obviously we've had a robust discussion around kind of public financing. Really, we see this as a tool in the toolbox for for FAME in order to be able to do that. I don't have a current list of projects to pursue under that authority. I think we'd see it as opening the door to conversations about FAME could use the authority that they used to have and had for decades to review what projects and opportunities there might be for public finance of projects. And so I guess I'm glad FAME is here because I think they're the experts of their authority and what they can do. But just also want to note that in 35A, the DOER's new statute, we, talked about this before. And one of the things that the department is required to do is work with FAME should they issue revenue obligation securities for energy facilities. That's included in the response. So this is somewhat in response to authority we've been tasked with, coordinating with state agencies and others. I think just trying to find different, looking at different avenues or tools in the toolbox for these projects. So I think with that, yeah, happy to take other questions and definitely would like FAME's expertise on this topic.
Okay, questions for the commissioner, Representative Rente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At present, you all can advise FAME on the potential for some sort of financing for a project, at least give input on whether it makes sense. Do you ever see a role for DOER going beyond that? In fact, engaging in any of the financing activities itself?
Thanks, Representative. Just could be maybe a finer point on that. I mean, our current advice is that we need to advise that, and work on those projects. I would defer to FAME on their typical intake process or how they make entities aware that this is available. I think we're well positioned to, kind of work with them to look at opportunities, but I don't see us as being the entity that's going to be doing the actual financing. It's really, our advice to FAME and in this matter. I guess I should also say that in the department legislation that was created, the legislature also, this committee passed, the legislature passed requirement that FAME and for a future board member have a board member with energy expertise. And so I think that goes part with this as well.
Representative Warren.
Thank you so much. Just a bigger picture question, maybe. Why wasn't this part of the department bill? It seems like more of a broader mission sort of question, or why not a separate bill? What brought it about at this time if there isn't a specific it doesn't seem like there's a specific intent to do something that's time sensitive. No.
Thanks, Representative. I think we, and kind of finding that this had lapsed and I don't think that there was necessary, we were tackling a lot in LD 1270 last year. And I think in recent conversations with FAME, we felt like now was the appropriate time to put this forward. It's related to their, related to funding that they can provide. This is a supplemental budget bill. And so we felt like this was a good use of that, really to kind of clarify that this sunset, should be re-upped, not that, they, so it just kind of clarifies that sunset as opposed to direction of new activity. But I would maybe defer to FAME on some of their processes.
Follow up, Representative.
Why was there a sunset provision?
Thanks, Representative. Some of this statute goes back to the 90s, and so I don't entirely know why there was a sunset. My understanding is that, and I'll let Bill come up if, is that it was a sunset on what the board could approve. So the FAME board had to approve something and they could not approve beyond a certain date. But I think there's a legislative history that I don't have.
I mean, I think I'll try to do my own research before voting, but that would be important for me to understand if we're going to change legislation, why it's there. But thank you. I appreciate that.
Other questions for the Commissioner? Representative Foster?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, tomorrow we have before us another work session on Senator Lawrence's bill, LD 838. And I'm wondering if the TT were approved, does that basically fall along the same line and maybe even preclude 838?
Thanks, Representative Foster. Hard for me to know exactly where that legislation is headed, whether it's, there's been language around a study or other items. I think for me, it's a kind of a no regrets tool in the toolbox to allow FAME to do this should something move forward as regards to kind of a broader analysis, which we need to consider as part of that.
Other questions for the moment for the Commissioner?
No, I was just wondering if Representative Foster wanted me to answer that question. I'm kidding.
Thank you, Commissioner. Why don't we have Mr. Norbert come up if we could? And of course, can direct other clarifying questions to Commissioner after that. We thank you. If you could introduce yourself.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Sachs, Senator Lawrence, distinguished members of the committee. I'm Bill Norbert with the Finance Authority of Maine. It's my pleasure to be here today to try and provide some information. Happy to answer any questions you have. So as the Commissioner noted, FAME has certain bonding authority. You probably think of us more about financing businesses or higher education. But, energy projects can be business too. And some time ago, this language was put in the law. And, there were no concrete projects at the time, but the thought was that back then, it would be good to have this as an option, and there might be some coming down the road. But since we don't do a lot of energy financing, maybe it'd be good to put a time frame around it just to reassess and see how it went. It turns out no one used these at all. And so, from our viewpoint, this is a good thing just to reactivate, to have as an option. We don't have any plans, but the way our bonding process, there are guardrails. We do great due diligence, lots of underwriting. We would consult with the department. Our board would have to approve it. Also in statute there are limits to how much we can fund for different types of bonds, and these type of bonds would be 180 million. So that's the ceiling currently. And these are moral obligation bonds. These are something we would be very, very careful before issuing and approving. We would consult with experts and, so I hope that's somewhat helpful. There's really not a lot of story behind it, except we just thought with the new department and having conversations with them, doing an inventory over the fall, what's on your books that could be possibly part of a mix for energy financing projects. And we noticed these and said, why not reactivate them for a time?
Questions, Representative Kessler?
Thank you for being here. I was wondering, would you be able to just briefly describe what a developer, what the process would be to, if this was currently still in place, what that would look like for them and how they would use this?
Sure. So typically, keep in mind, we haven't done any of these energy projects, but we do lots of business financing. Typically, a project would make themselves known to us either through, the business owners contacting us or their attorney. Typically with these bond transactions, an attorney's involved on their side. And our general counsel and bond counsel would walk them through the process. But basically, there'd be a lot, as I said, a lot of details would be required from them about their project, projections. The most important thing with bond financing is that there be a definite revenue stream to repay these bonds. The bond market, FAME isn't going to tolerate, and the bond market isn't going to tolerate loosey-goosey projections. It would have to be a definite revenue stream that's projected. And FAME would hold a hearing, a public hearing, before it issues a certificate of approval where, members of the public can make their concerns known. And then the hearing's concluded and the staff makes a recommendation to the board. But again, this could take many, many months, involve consultants we might hire, bond counsel, bond underwriters, in addition to our own team, to review and give us confidence that the projected revenues are there. And, there have to be certain findings made in statutes before the certificate of approval is issued. Generally, those go along the lines of that, the project's going to make a contribution to the economic growth, control of pollution, perhaps, or the betterment of the health, welfare, or safety of the inhabitants of the state. Also, it can't result in a substantial detriment to existing businesses in the state. So these are all factors that would be weighed. Is that helpful, Representative Kessler?
Absolutely.
Great.
Additional questions, Representative Warren?
Thank you so much for being here.
You're
And
welcome.
I regret I don't know more about the program, but can you talk a little bit about strings attached as far as what are the types of labor standards or workforce contributions that are required
Yeah.
if one's going to receive this sort of
Right.
bond funding or?
Yeah, none of those standards are in statute or would
Okay.
apply.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And Mr. Norber, I had seen, I watched your testimony in front of the
I'm sorry.
AFA HED. No, that's fine. I thought you had stated that one of these provisions had been used once.
Yes. There's something called the Electric Rate Stabilization Program, and that's sort of at the lower part of that section TT language. And I bet Senator Lawrence might remember it, having served many sessions. But it's actually, this was something that occurred under Governor McKernan's administration, and it was at a time of high electric rates. And basically, CMP and other utilities were locked into these expensive contracts with electric generator providers that weren't utilities, such as up in Aroostook County in Fort Fairfield, there was a 35 megawatt wood-fired, electric producer that sold to CMP to help run the grid and all. And they were locked in an expensive contract. So the thought behind this was that CMP would basically get a loan from FAME in the form of bond proceeds to buy out that contract. And the whole goal was to lower electric rates for the citizens of Maine, for ratepayers. And so that was one success. And then we didn't hear from anyone else, and no one else used it. The moment passed. But if, there's a lengthy, I've dug up, I researched and found in the law library a lengthy 130-page report submitted by FAME to the legislature back in the mid-90s. And it was really interesting to learn about the context and the safeguards of the program and what had happened. Okay. I'm happy to share that with your analysts, or if anyone has trouble sleeping at night.
So so to Representative Warren's question about the sunset, why was it sunset? And you said, I just want to put a fine point on that you'd said, because you were, at the time, your belief was that they put it in place to be available. And
Yeah.
then there would be an assessment about use, et cetera.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sure.
Representative Foster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Not having been around quite as long as Senator Lawrence to have become part of the furniture. I think that was the term you were looking for. And you answered two or three of the questions that I had,
Yeah.
why was the sunset there? Why was it allowed to sunset, so on and so forth? I think those are answered. I'm wondering if you might, if you look back at what you, what that was originally intended for and bring us up to today, maybe you have a couple of examples of projects that Fame might consider when we look at energy as we're seeing it in
Yeah.
2026. Just a couple of examples that somebody
Yeah.
might bring to you.
Well, I mean, we don't have any in the pipeline and we don't do, much energy financing. But I mean, one thing that in reviewing the applicable definitions in the statute of these terms, electric rate, energy generating systems and energy distribution systems, it can be a very broad term. So you shouldn't be just thinking of electric related energy. It could be biofuel, biomass, gasification. I had these definitions are in here. I'm finding them right now, if you give me a second. And the owners of it could be not just a utility, it could be something an individual, a business owns, or a municipality. And this could involve systems using biomass, peat, solar, wastewater, related dams, wind, wood, or coal. So it's pretty broad. And the idea basically is that it's some sort of business involving energy, and they want to do something that requires, tens of millions of dollars, isn't easy to finance in a regular traditional banking way. And if there's enough guarantee that it's going to be paid back and we can get comfortable around that we would use our access to lower interest financing to help make it happen.
Yes, thank you. And I'm not sure that must be your Fame's directive on what that program would be intended
Right.
for.
Yeah.
Not in statute necessarily, but I'm wondering if you, maybe Lindsay can direct us to where we might find that information.
Oh, I'm happy to share it with her
Yeah.
after.
And so with that in mind, when you reference the funds that Fame made available to basically buy out biomass generator contracts for CMP, or
Yeah.
made that money available, is that something that would still be that type of program still be available in today's world?
No, so that electric rate stabilization project sunsetted, that's one of the languages here that we're trying to reactivate to make it available again.
No, what
Oh,
I
I'm
mean
sorry.
is if this were to pass.
Yeah.
Is that type of project something that could come before you again?
Yes, under the electric rate stabilization program and its current definitions, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Additional questions for Mr. Norberg? About section T2. Senator Lawrence.
Excuse me, is there an upper limit of what you think Fame would be able to finance?
180 million
180
for
million,
all of these energy,
for not just for a single project, but
correct,
for all
for
projects.
electric rate stabilization, energy generating systems and energy distribution systems. And that's per the statute.
Okay.
Any follow-up?
Nope.
Any additional questions for Mr. Norton? We appreciate you being in EUT.
It's my
Thank
pleasure.
you.
It's great to be here. I rarely come, as you know, and I'm going to skedaddle before
Yes.
your questions
Before
get
we
even-
ask any more
get even
questions, yes.
harder.
He's already a seasoned vet. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, is there anyone else you wish to answer questions or ask questions of around Part TT? Okay. Seeing none, committee, I have that we would like to caucus items reference numbers 208, which is regarding the grid stabilization funds, the reference numbers 210, 11, and 12, which speak to moving the commissioner and deputy commissioner to general fund, and then language parts RR and TT. Have I missed anything that we are supposed to caucus? Always good to set those expectations. So we will be at ease for a few moments for caucus, and then we will just text each other and say we're done. How's that? Good? Good. Thanks. bringing us back in for the remaining items, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I will direct us to the first item, which is reference number 208 regarding providing funding to meet the need for grid resilience, grant program. Pleasure of the committee to move this either in, out, or in as amended.
I move in.
Okay, and we have a second from Representative Runte. Discussion? I understand, Representative Warren?
Yeah, I can't support it in its current form, so I'll be voting against that motion or that vote. And I'll be supporting an alternative that will provide the resource only sufficient to meet the matching requirement for federal funding to draw down that 4.4 million. And a condition there that it will be returned to the general fund if that drawdown does not occur.
Okay, and the amount, Representative Warren?
I believe it's a number that we got from a staff member with the department, and I believe it's $750,000, but I may be corrected. Yep.
Okay, so that will be an alternate report. So it sounds like it would be to move in, to move out, or move in as amended. So Representative McIntyre, does that make sense? You're tracking? Okay. Any discussion of any of the options that are currently before the committee? Okay. So all of those who in favor of the current moving in 208 as presented. 1, 2. Okay. All of those who would just like to move it out without amendments whatsoever. 1, 2, 3. And those that would like to move into 08 at $750,000, non-lapse or lapsing after the main grid resilience. So I would probably say fiscal year 27, 28. Who would like to do that? 1, 2, 3, 4. And Lindsay, if you need any questions about that, we can certainly get there.
In as amended.
In as amended. So a one-time 750,000 that lapses fiscal year 27, 28 at the end of fiscal year 27, 28 would be the intent. So if we need to do half of it just for 26, 27 and then come back for the rest, that's fine.
All right, so just to be clear, so instead of the $3 million, this would be one-time appropriation of $750,000 for fiscal year 26, 27, and then whatever is not used at the conclusion of fiscal year 27 will lapse back into the general fund.
My understanding is there's 2 years left on the program, so it is supposed to be to go through those 2 years, 4 and 5 of the grant. So that would put us into 27, 28. So I'm looking at Mr. Russo to see if we can encumber that to lapse at the end of that part, or rather we need to do a one-time for this fiscal year and then in the next budget they come back for fiscal year 27, 28. If it's a one-time.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to yell across the room. Michael Russo, Office of Fiscal and Program Review. I think the cleanest way would be to do the one time in this budget and wait for a future budget request. Unallocated language can get particularly annoying in a large budget document. It will get lost and might not be referenced properly. So I think that would be your cleanest approach. And that way it ensures that you'll see it again and you won't have to worry about remembering that you did it.
Good, good. So is it 750,000 in this next fiscal year? And then you just say non-lapsing, right? Because then they would be able to carry it over this one appropriation into the next budget year. Right? And then it's gone.
That makes sense to me. So this would be a one-time appropriation of $750,000 in 26, 27. You will allow it to carry forward what's unused, but because it's one time, you're saying
When
They
it's
will have
gone,
to
it's
come
gone.
back if they want additional funds in the future.
Correct. Does that feel appropriate to folks who voted on that? Okay, good.
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Thank you both. Okay, so moving on to references on page 2 of 9, 210, 211, and 212. I'll entertain a motion for those 3 items together. Representative Webb.
I would like to move to all 3 of those items in.
And do I have a second? Representative Warren, any discussion from the committee around these 3 items? Seeing none, all those in favor of moving those 3 items in, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. And those opposed? 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. Going to now direct our attentions to part RR, page 8 of 9. Part RR authorizes any unexpended balances in DOR to carry and not lapse for the general fund. Any motions for Senator Lauren?
Move in.
We have a motion to move in. Is there a second? Okay. Seconded by Representative Warren. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. And finally, moving on to part TT, the language part of that same page with moving those dates to sunset. I'm seeing different people pointing at me.
I will move in.
Okay, we have a motion to move in, seconded by Representative Warren. Any discussion about part TT? Under language, seeing none. All those in favor of moving in part TT? 6, and those opposed? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Lindsay, did we miss any part of the budget or have any questions about anything that we voted on?
I think you are in good shape, although I would love to be able to check my notes, but I think you covered everything.
So we had set a deadline of 4 o'clock for people to put in their votes, although it might be that some people can't. Lindsay, is there an acceptable time? I know you have to get this in by 5. So what would be your thoughts about when people can get their votes into you?
4:30 would be great.
Okay.
What I will do because of the tight time frame, I'm going to submit this to AFA. I will send a copy to the committee. Yeah,
Right.
that's
It is
unfortunately, I'm
what
not
it
able
is.
to bring it back for your review.
Right.
But
So
that's where we're
folks,
at.
I'll text the members who are not here on our side of the aisle and just respectfully ask that you all do as well. And certainly folks can talk to AFA members about any of these items as well. You certainly are welcome to do so as this is an advisory report only for folks. All right, so we're going to close the work session on LD 2212. And Lindsay, you said you just have a few items for us?
Oh, I do have a couple of language reviews, if Lynn wouldn't mind passing those out.
While that's happening, members, please a brief reminder, if you cannot be here tomorrow in person, please let me know so we can count noses to make sure we have a quorum for 10 a.m. Also, because we need 7 bodies in the room to do that. And then if you're going to be in Zoom, make sure you're coordinating with Lynn around the links. Thank you.
No reflection on you, Lindsay, but I'm gonna start language reviews because it's snowing down my way.
And for folks who want to register votes, these should actually be super quick. So what you've got in front of you is the fiscal note for LD 2153 for the majority report. This is an act to transfer the responsibilities of the Governor's Energy Office to the Department of Energy Resources. Fiscal note was required, but you'll notice that any additional costs to the department or the PUC to implement the bill are expected to be minor and can be absorbed within existing budgeted resources. The majority has already seen the pink copy language review. This was a divided report, ought to pass as amended, ought not to pass. So I just want to make sure that no one has any questions, and if you do, let me know, but otherwise this will be reported out of committee. All right, so sounds like we're good on that one. Next up is LD 2203. This is an act to provide low-income electric ratepayers, low-income electric ratepayer protections. This is the one you may recall I brought back saying that I wanted to, this was the committee bill where I flagged for the committee that the summary language didn't quite match what the bill did. And you all said we like this, what the summary does. So this is the revised language and provides that a competitive electricity provider may not provide generation service to a customer receiving low-income assistance authorized in statute at a rate that is more than the standard offer service rate established under law that would otherwise be applicable to that customer. And as directed, I worked with the public advocate on this, and she has seen the language and was comfortable with it. I'm looking to her just to make sure that, well, I'm guessing she's fine. And this will, of course, come back for final pink copy language review. Does anyone have any questions or concerns on this?
I appreciate the clarification. Committee, any questions? Comments? Thank you. Was that it?
That is all I've got for today.
All right. Thank you, committee. We are adjourned. Get home safely.